Story number 1. Vanished in the Blizzard. The Ghost Ship of Greenland, 1900. I've always been drawn to the mysteries that lie beneath the ice. Stories that time has tried and failed to bury. When I first heard about the HMS Endurance, a small transport ship that vanished during a ferocious blizzard in Greenland in 1900, my curiosity was instantly ignited. Decades later, the ship was miraculously found, perfectly preserved in the icy embrace of the Arctic. Yet the entire crew had vanished without a trace. As a historian specializing in maritime anomalies, I knew I had to uncover the truth behind this chilling enigma. My journey began in the bustling streets of Copenhagen, where the remnants of the Endurance had been discovered. The ship lay dormant beneath a thick layer of snow and ice, its once vibrant hull now a ghostly white monument to a bygone era. Local legends spoke of strange lights and eerie sounds emanating from the wreckage, tales dismissed by most as mere folklore. But the evidence was undeniable. There was no sign of struggle, no wreckage beyond the ship itself. It was as if the crew had simply vanished into thin air. Determined to get closer, I arranged an expedition with a team of Arctic experts and seasoned explorers. Equipped with the latest ice-breaking technology and a robust support crew, we set sail for Greenland, the destination of countless lost souls and untold stories. The journey was arduous, the seas treacherous, and the cold biting into our very bones. Yet, the allure of the unknown kept us moving forward, driven by the promise of uncovering the truth. As we approached the coordinates of the Endurance, the weather took a turn for the worse. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind began to howl with a ferocity that seemed almost sentient. The icebergs loomed like silent sentinels, their jagged peaks piercing the stormy sky. We battled through towering waves and blinding snow, each moment a test of our resilience and determination. Finally, after days of relentless pursuit, the Endurance emerged from the swirling tempest, a spectral figure nestled amidst the ice. The sight was both awe-inspiring and unnerving. The ship stood pristine, untouched by the ravages of time and nature. As we anchored nearby, the storm abruptly subsided, leaving behind an eerie stillness that hung heavy in the air. Equipped with submersibles and drones, we began our exploration of the ship. The hull was intact, every detail preserved as if frozen in time. Inside, the cabins were immaculate, the personal belongings of the crew untouched by decay. It was a scene straight out of a maritime time capsule. Yet the absence of any human presence was profoundly unsettling. As night fell, we set up camp on the ice, the remnants of the Endurance casting long, haunting shadows under the pale moonlight. The temperature plummeted, and the howling wind seemed to carry whispers from the past. It was then that the true horror began. Around midnight, the air grew inexplicably colder, frost forming on our equipment despite our layered clothing. The wind, now a mere murmur, carried voices, faint, anguished cries that echoed through the desolate landscape. At first, we dismissed it as the echoes of our own fears, amplified by the isolation and the unforgiving environment. But as the night deepened, the sounds became more distinct, more desperate. I was the first to notice the strange lights flickering near the ship. Blue and green hues danced across the icy surface, moving in patterns that defied natural explanation. Intrigued and alarmed, I approached the edge of the ice, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. As I drew closer, the lights coalesced into figures, shadowy apparitions of men and women dressed in early 20th century naval attire, their faces etched with sorrow and fear. One figure stepped forward, his eyes hollow and empty, his mouth moving silently as if trying to communicate. I reached out, my heart pounding, but as my fingers brushed the apparition, a wave of icy cold surged through me. The spirits recoiled, their forms flickering like candles in the wind. Back at camp, panic set in. The voices grew louder, the cries more intense, as if the spirits were trying to convey a message beyond our comprehension. My team and I huddled together, fear gripping us as the true nature of the Endurance's disappearance began to unravel. We delved into the ship's log, meticulously documenting every entry. The final entries were a frantic account of a severe storm, equipment failures, and a desperate struggle for survival. But there was no mention of any supernatural occurrences, just the harrowing tale of men and women battling against nature's wrath. It was as if the logs had been tampered with, the true story erased from the pages. Determined to uncover the truth, we decided to conduct a nighttime investigation. Armed with cameras and audio equipment, we ventured back to the ship, the air thick with tension and anticipation. As we approached, the apparitions reappeared, their sorrowful gazes piercing through the darkness. This time, one of the spirits gestured towards the bow of the ship, his hand trembling as if holding an invisible weight. We followed his lead, our footsteps crunching on the snow as we navigated the frozen deck. The atmosphere was oppressive, the air heavy with an unseen force that made every breath a struggle. At the bow, we discovered a hidden compartment, cleverly concealed beneath layers of ice and debris. Inside, we found remnants of personal journals and letters. The true story of the Endurance's crew finally laid bare. The logs detailed not only their battle against the storm but also inexplicable phenomena. Strange lights, voices in the wind, and an overwhelming sense of being watched by an unseen presence. As we pieced together the final moments of the crew, the apparitions grew restless, their cries turning into wails of anguish. It became clear that something beyond our understanding had intervened, claiming the lives of the Endurance's crew and binding their spirits to the ship forever. Realizing the gravity of our discovery, we made the difficult decision to leave the ship and the haunted grounds behind. As we turned to leave, the spirits gathered around us, their forms shimmering with a sorrowful beauty. The lead apparition, the man at the bow, extended his hand once more, his eyes filled with a silent plea. "Help us find peace," he whispered, his voice a mere breath on the wind. Driven by a sense of duty and compassion, we vowed to honor their memories and share their story with the world. The spirits of the Endurance had finally been heard, their voices no longer lost in the storm but echoing through history as a testament to their resilience and sorrow. Driving away from Greenland, the sun rising over the frozen horizon, I felt a profound sense of closure. The mystery of the Endurance had been unraveled, the supernatural elements acknowledged and respected. Yet, the memory of those haunted apparitions lingered, a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. Years later, the story of the Endurance continues to captivate and terrify those who hear it. The ship remains a symbol of the unforgiving power of nature and the enduring spirit of those who dare to face its wrath. And sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, when the wind howls just right and the snow blankets the earth in silent stillness, I catch a faint whisper on the breeze, a lingering echo of. Story number 2. Whispers in the Blue Storm. I've always loved Texas winters, the serene blanket of snow contrasting sharply with the usual scorching heat. But nothing could have prepared me for the great blizzard of 2021, a tempest that transformed the Lone Star State into an icy nightmare. As a meteorologist stationed in a remote town near Amarillo, I thought I understood storms. Yet, this one was different. It wasn't just the ferocity of the blizzard that unnerved me, but the mysterious blue lights that danced ominously across the stormy sky. It was late December when the first snowflakes began to fall. At first, it was just another winter storm, but within hours, the snow piled higher, and the winds howled with an unnatural intensity. Our town, usually bustling with holiday cheer, became eerily silent as residents hunkered down, hoping the storm would pass quickly. The power flickered, and the streets were deserted, save for the occasional figure braving the elements. Around midnight, as the storm reached its peak, something extraordinary happened. Through the swirling snow and howling wind, I noticed flickers of blue light moving in the sky. At first, I dismissed them as reflections from distant traffic or perhaps unusual lightning. But as I watched, the lights seemed to take on a life of their own, forming intricate patterns that defied natural explanation. They moved with purpose, weaving through the storm like sentient beings observing us. Curiosity overcame caution. I grabbed my binoculars and peered through the blizzard, trying to get a clearer view. The lights intensified, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. My rational mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. Were these some kind of atmospheric phenomena, or something far more sinister? The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a landscape of white silence. The town was buried under feet of snow, and the damage was extensive. As I ventured out to assess the aftermath, the blue lights haunted my thoughts. Determined to find answers, I began interviewing the few residents who had braved the storm. Most dismissed the lights as a trick of the light or electrical disturbances caused by the power outages. But a few shared unsettling stories. Old Mrs. Henderson, who lived alone on the outskirts of town, claimed she saw the lights as well. "They weren't just lights," she said, her voice trembling. "They felt like eyes watching me, following my every move." Her husband had died in a similar storm years before, and she believed the lights were the restless spirits of lost souls searching for their way home. Another resident, Tom, a truck driver who got stranded on a deserted highway, described the lights as angry and full of sorrow. He swore he heard whispers carried by the wind, voices pleading for help. "They called us to leave," he said. "But where to go? We were trapped." Intrigued and unsettled, I delved deeper into local legends and historical accounts. There were tales of unexplained phenomena during severe storms, stories passed down through generations of farmers and ranchers. Some spoke of ancient spirits tied to the land, while others hinted at extraterrestrial visitors monitoring Earth's weather patterns. Determined to uncover the truth, I set up my equipment in the same area where the lights had been most intense. Night fell, and the storm clouds began to gather once more, though not as fierce as before. As midnight approached, the blue lights reappeared, more vivid and structured than I had ever seen. This time, they formed a precise geometric pattern, almost like a celestial map. I recorded everything, hoping to capture evidence that could explain the phenomenon. As the clock struck 12, the lights intensified, enveloping the sky in a radiant blue glow. The air grew cold, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. The whispers returned, clearer this time, though still indistinct. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably pleading. Suddenly, the lights began to converge, descending towards the ground with a speed that defied logic. I stumbled back, heart racing, as the lights formed a pulsating sphere hovering above the snow-covered fields. The temperature dropped even further, frost forming on my eyelashes as the sphere emitted a low, resonant hum that vibrated through my very core. A figure materialized within the sphere, a humanoid shape with an ethereal glow. Its eyes, large and devoid of emotion, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I felt a connection, a silent communication that transcended language. Images flashed before my eyes, visions of soldiers lost in blizzards, families torn apart by nature's wrath, and a haunting plea for peace. The figure extended a hand towards me, and I felt an invisible force pulling me closer. Fear battled with empathy as I reached out, my fingers trembling against the cold air. The moment our hands touched, a surge of energy coursed through me, the whispers turning into a unified voice. "Help us find peace. Free our souls." The sphere dissolved into the night, the blue lights fading into the distance as quickly as they had appeared. The storm passed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a sense of calm that belied the horrors we had witnessed. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I returned to town with a newfound purpose. In the weeks that followed, I worked tirelessly to document the phenomenon, combining my meteorological expertise with the eerie experiences shared by the townspeople. The evidence was compelling, but it offered no definitive explanation, just a glimpse into a world where the natural and supernatural intertwined in the most chilling ways. The Great Blizzard of 2021 became more than just a historical event. It was a testament to the mysteries that still lie hidden in our world, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to seek the truth. And sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, I still hear the faint whispers carried by the wind, a reminder that some storms leave more than just snow in their wake. They leave echoes of the past, forever haunting the present. Story number 3. Whispers in the Blizzard, Alaska, 1996. I've always been drawn to the untamed wilderness, the raw beauty of nature in its most unforgiving form. So when my friends Jake, Laura, and Mike and I decided to embark on a winter expedition to Alaska's remote backcountry, felt like the perfect adventure. Little did we know that the very landscape we revered would turn against us in ways we could never have imagined. It was late November 1996 when we set out, our spirits high and our backpacks laden with supplies. The plan was simple: hike through the Denali National Park, camp beneath the towering pines, and revel in the solitude that only such isolation could provide. The first few days were everything we had hoped for: crisp air, endless snowfields, and nights filled with the soft glow of the aurora borealis. On the fourth day, the weather took a sudden and drastic turn. Dark clouds rolled in from the north, and the temperature plummeted, signaling the approach of a severe snowstorm. We hurried to set up camp, but the wind was relentless, howling through the trees with a fury that left us shaken. As night fell, the blizzard descended upon us with full force, trapping us in our tent with little more than blankets and the dim light of our lantern. The first night was tense but manageable. We took turns keeping watch, the wind's rage muffled by the sturdy fabric of our tent. But as midnight approached, an eerie stillness settled over the landscape, broken only by the muffled sounds of the storm outside. It was then that we began to hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible whispering that seemed to emanate from beyond the tent's confines. First, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct. Words began to form, a haunting chorus that seemed to call out to us, "Leave, leave now." The voices were soft, yet their urgency sent chills down our spines. Jake, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize the sounds. "Probably just the wind," he said, though his voice betrayed his own unease. Laura, sensitive to the environment, felt a deeper sense of dread. "We shouldn't ignore it," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Mike, the most superstitious of us, began to recount local legends about spirits wandering the Alaskan wilderness, lost souls seeking refuge or perhaps vengeance. As the night wore on, the whispers intensified, their message clear and insistent. "Leave, leave now." It was as if invisible hands were tugging at our very souls, urging us to abandon our camp and flee into the storm. The thought of leaving our carefully chosen campsite in the heart of the blizzard was terrifying. But the voices planted seeds of doubt in our minds. By early morning, the storm had reached its zenith. The wind was a deafening roar, and the snow fell in thick, blinding sheets. We huddled together, debating our next move. Should we stay and weather the storm, or heed the mysterious warnings and seek shelter elsewhere? The decision weighed heavily on us, each option fraught with its own dangers. In the end, we chose to stay. We fortified our tent as best as we could, reinforcing it against the relentless assault of the storm. As dawn broke, the blizzard began to wane, the fierce winds subsiding into a gentle, swirling dance of snowflakes. Exhausted and frostbitten, we emerged from our tent to survey the aftermath. That's when we saw them, footprints leading away from our campsite, disappearing into an area of the snowfield where no one lived. The prints were large, unlike any human gait, suggesting the presence of something or someone else. A sense of unease settled over us as we realized that the voices had not been mere figments of our imagination. Determined to uncover the truth, we followed the trail, our steps crunching through the fresh snow. The footprints led us to a desolate stretch of land, an expanse of snow as far as the eye could see. In the distance, we spotted a flickering light, moving erratically through the blizzard's remnants. Our hearts pounded as we approached, the source of the mysterious whispers now clear before us. Standing amidst the swirling snow was a figure cloaked in shadows, his presence both haunting and sorrowful. His eyes, empty yet filled with an eternal anguish, met ours with a silent plea. The air around him was cold, the temperature dropping further despite the diminishing storm. "Leave, leave now," his voice echoed, a desperate cry that resonated deep within our souls. Mike, unable to contain his fear, began to back away, but the figure remained rooted to the spot. Laura stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. "What do you want from us?" The figure extended a hand, his fingers outstretched in a gesture of pleading. "I'm lost. Can't find my way home." His voice was a mere whisper, carried away by the lingering winds. Jake, ever the protector, stepped between us and the apparition, his skepticism faltering in the face of the undeniable supernatural presence. "We mean you no harm," he said softly, trying to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. "Tell us how we can help." The figure's form began to shimmer, the snowflakes swirling around him as if drawn to his sorrow. "Guide me to the light." His eyes held a depth of despair that spoke of a life abruptly ended, trapped in this frozen purgatory. A sense of compassion overcame our fear. We couldn't turn our backs on this lost soul, his torment evident in every fiber of his spectral being. We nodded in unison, understanding that our presence was no longer a threat but a beacon of hope for a restless spirit. We followed him through the snowfield, the footprints now leading us towards an ancient, forgotten burial ground buried beneath layers of ice and snow. The ground was hallowed, marked by weathered gravestones and remnants of lives long extinguished. The figure paused before a particularly worn tombstone, his form beginning to fade as he approached his final resting place. "This is where I belong," he whispered, his voice fading into the howling wind. "Thank you for helping me find peace." With those final words, the figure dissolved into the morning light, his presence leaving behind a profound sense of closure. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by the gentle warmth of a new day dawning over the Alaskan wilderness. We stood in silence, the weight of the encounter settling over us like the first light of dawn. The footprints disappeared, the land reclaiming its silence once more. The mystery of the whispers and the lost soul had been resolved, leaving us with a story that would forever change our understanding of the unseen forces that inhabit the world. As we made our way back to civilization, the snow glistening under the rising sun, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. We had not only survived the storm but had also brought peace to a tortured spirit, bridging the gap between life and death with compassion and understanding. Years later, the memories of that winter expedition linger, a haunting reminder of the night we listened to the whispers of the lost and helped guide a restless soul to eternal peace. The Alaskan wilderness remains as majestic and unforgiving as ever, but beneath its serene surface lies a world of secrets and stories waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to listen to the whispers in the blizzard. Story number 4. Shadows of the Frozen Retreat. I've always been captivated by history's darker chapters, the untold stories that linger in the shadows of time. So when I decided to delve into Napoleon's ill-fated retreat from Russia in 1812, little did I know that my quest for knowledge would lead me to confront the very ghosts of the past. My name is Thomas Keller, a historian with a penchant for uncovering the supernatural elements intertwined with historical events. Armed with my research, camera, and an unyielding curiosity, I ventured into the heart of the Russian wilderness, determined to uncover the mysteries that still haunt the land Napoleon's grand army once tread. The journey began in late November, as the first hints of winter began to blanket the landscape. The Russian countryside, vast and unforgiving, was a stark contrast to the bustling streets of Paris where I spent most of my days poring over old maps and journals. My destination was a remote area where historical records indicated the heaviest losses during the retreat occurred, a place now forgotten by time, swallowed by snow and silence. As I trekked deeper into the wilderness, the temperature plummeted, and the wind began to howl like a restless spirit. The trees, bare and skeletal, clawed at the sky, their branches scraping against the icy air. My breath came out in visible puffs, each step crunching through the untouched snow. The isolation was profound, the only sounds the relentless storm and the distant howling of wolves. It felt as though the land itself was mourning the loss of the soldiers who had perished here centuries ago. On the third day of my expedition, the storm reached its peak. The blizzard was merciless, reducing visibility to mere feet and turning the already treacherous terrain into a nightmare of whiteout conditions. I had set up a makeshift shelter, a simple tent shielded against the fury of nature, and huddled inside with my gear, hoping the storm would pass by morning. But as the night deepened, an unsettling stillness settled over the landscape, broken only by the muffled sounds of the storm outside. Around midnight, I awoke to a sound unlike any I had heard before, a faint, echoing drumbeat that seemed to resonate from the very ground beneath me. My heart raced as I listened, the rhythmic pounding growing louder, more insistent. It was as if the earth itself was mourning, each beat a lament for the souls lost in the brutal retreat. Gathering my courage, I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the storm, the wind biting into my skin despite my layers of clothing. Through the swirling snow, I caught sight of a figure moving steadily across the open field. At first, I thought it was a survivor or perhaps a fellow researcher. But as I drew closer, the reality became horrifyingly clear. It was a soldier, his uniform tattered, his face gaunt and hollow, eyes vacant and staring into the abyss. He moved with a deliberate, almost mechanical gait, his steps leaving deep impressions in the snow that seemed to vanish without a trace. "Help us," he whispered, his voice a hollow echo that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was witnessing. The figure continued to march forward, undeterred by the storm's wrath, his presence both tragic and terrifying. As I watched, more figures emerged from the blizzard, soldiers lost to the cold, their spirits forever bound to the land they had fought and died on. They moved as one, a spectral army walking the path of their doomed retreat, their sorrow palpable in the freezing air. Desperate to understand, I raised my camera, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. The lens flickered, struggling against the storm, but the image remained blurred, the faces of the soldiers indistinct shadows against the whiteout. The drumbeat intensified, the rhythm syncing with the pounding of my own heart, creating a sense of impending doom that gnawed at my sanity. One of the figures paused, turning to face me with an expression of profound sorrow. "We never made it home," he murmured, his words carrying the weight of countless untold tragedies. Bound to this land, forever searching for peace. A surge of empathy washed over me, mingling with the fear that kept my feet rooted to the spot. I realized then that these were not malevolent spirits but lost souls, their existence a haunting reminder of the horrors endured during the retreat. The coldness that enveloped me was not just from the storm but from the despair that emanated from their very beings. As dawn approached, the storm began to abate, the snow slowing to a gentle fall. The spectral army started to fade, their forms dissolving into the morning mist as if their mission was complete. The drumbeat softened, replaced by the soft whispers of the wind through the trees. The landscape was serene once more, the horrors of the night leaving behind a lingering sense of melancholy. I packed up my gear, the experience etched into my memory forever. The ghosts of Napoleon's retreat had revealed themselves, their stories of loss and endurance a powerful testament to the human spirit's resilience. As I made my way back to civilization, the whispers of the past seemed to follow me, a haunting echo of the lives lost to the unforgiving wilderness. In the years that followed, I published my findings, the footage of the ghostly soldiers sparking debate and fascination among historians and paranormal enthusiasts alike. Some dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, fueled by the isolation and harsh conditions. But those who visited the site after me reported similar sightings, soldiers marching through the snow, their eyes hollow with unspoken sorrow. The Great Blizzard of 1812 had not only claimed the lives of thousands but had also bound their spirits to the land they had perished on. Their presence serves as a reminder of the brutality of war and the enduring pain of those left behind. As I reflect on that harrowing night, I am reminded that history is not just a collection of dates and events but a living, breathing entity that continues to shape our present in ways we can scarcely comprehend. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the snow begins to fall in heavy sheets, I swear I can hear the distant echoes of drumbeats and the soft whispers of lost souls, forever walking the path of their tragic retreat, a spectral army bound by their undying sorrow and the relentless march of time. Story number 5. Ghosts on the Snowfield, Vermont Blizzard, 1938. The winter of 1938 in Vermont was one for the ages. As a young boy, I remember the snowstorms that seemed to come out of nowhere, transforming our modest farm into a monochromatic wilderness. But nothing could have prepared me for the great blizzard of that year. A tempest so fierce it buried not just our crops and livestock but also secrets that the cold would never thaw. I'm Ethan Miller, the eldest of the Miller family. And this is the story of that fateful winter when the snowfield became more than just a landscape of white. It became a stage for the supernatural, a place where shadows moved with intent, and whispers of the past echoed through the howling wind. Our farm was nestled on the outskirts of a small Vermont village, surrounded by expansive fields and dense forests. My father, Samuel Miller, was a hard-working man who took pride in his land. My mother, Clara, was the heart of our home, her warmth a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. My younger siblings, Molly and Tommy, were the light of my life, their laughter often breaking the monotony of farm life. As autumn waned, the air grew colder, and the days shortened. We stocked up on supplies, knowing that winter in Vermont was unforgiving. But nothing could have prepared us for the magnitude of the storm that approached in late December. The sky darkened early, the clouds heavy with the promise of relentless snow. By Christmas Eve, the blizzard was upon us, a swirling maelstrom that blanketed everything in thick, impenetrable snow. The first night was quiet, the wind howling outside but the warmth of our hearth keeping us safe. We huddled together, sharing stories and trying to stave off the creeping unease that the storm brought with it. Little did we know, the blizzard was not just a test of our endurance but also a harbinger of something far more sinister. Around midnight, the storm reached its peak. The wind howled like a living creature, and the snow fell in blinding sheets, obscuring our view of the outside world. It was then that Molly, barely 10 years old, woke me with a frantic cry. "Ethan, there's someone out there." I grabbed my coat and flashlight, the cold biting into my skin as I stepped out into the storm. The world was a swirling vortex of white, visibility reduced to mere feet. "Stay inside, Molly," I called, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear knotting in my stomach. But Molly was insistent, her tiny hand clutching mine tightly. "Please, Ethan." I saw her. Reluctantly, I followed her to the window, squinting through the thick curtain of snow. I saw nothing, just the endless expanse of white. "It's probably just a trick of the light," I reassured her, though doubt gnawed at me. As I turned to go back inside, a shadow flitted across the snowfield, moving with unnatural speed. My heart skipped a beat as I realized it wasn't a trick of the light. There was someone or something out there. The next morning, the blizzard had abated slightly, but the aftermath was a scene from a nightmare. Snowdrifts had buried our barn. The fence lines were obliterated, and our field was a sea of white. As we began to assess the damage, my father noticed something strange near the edge of the snowfield. "Look at these footprints," he said, kneeling down to inspect the ground. They were unlike any we had seen before, massive, deep impressions that led into the snow but stopped abruptly, as if the walker had vanished into thin air. Curiosity mixed with fear as we followed the trail, our footprints mirroring those we found. The footprints led to an old, abandoned farmhouse that had been part of the village until a mysterious fire had claimed it 5 years prior. The building was now nothing more than a hollow shell, its windows shattered and doors hanging ajar. "We need to check it out," my father declared, his voice steady despite the unease settling over us. We approached the house cautiously, the remnants of the fire smoldering beneath layers of snow. As we entered, the air grew colder, a chill that seemed to seep into our very bones. The interior was dark, the only light coming from our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The floorboards creaked under our weight, each step echoing ominously through the empty halls. In the living room, we found more of the strange footprints leading to a back room. The door was slightly ajar, and as we pushed it open, the temperature dropped sharply. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, everything was plunged into darkness before regaining its glow. Inside the room, the walls were covered in strange symbols and marks, etched deeply into the wood. My father ran his fingers over the patterns, his face pale with realization. These aren't just random scratches. They're rituals, protective symbols, ancient ones. A sudden noise made us freeze, a faint, agonized scream that seemed to come from the very walls. The sound pierced the silence, sending a shiver down my spine. We exchanged worried glances, unsure of what we were dealing with. "We need to leave," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "This place feels wrong." But as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that knocked us back. The room plunged into darkness once more, the temperature dropping further. My flashlight flickered uncontrollably, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. The symbols seemed to glow with an eerie light, the marks pulsating as if alive. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a figure, an apparition of a man, his face twisted in eternal anguish, his body half frozen in the remnants of the fire. His eyes, hollow and empty, bore into us, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. Leave now," his voice echoed through the room, the words dripping with pain and desperation. My father stepped forward, trying to remain calm. "Who are you? What do you want?" The ghostly figure didn't respond but instead began to move towards us, his steps silent yet menacing. The air grew thick with the scent of smoke and decay, the oppressive energy pressing down on us like an invisible weight. "We need to get out," my mother insisted, clutching my hand tightly. "This is too dangerous." But before we could move, the room began to distort, the walls bending and warping as if reality itself was unraveling. The symbols on the walls twisted into new, more sinister patterns, and the ghostly figure let out a wail that shook the very foundation of the house. Panic surged through me as I realized we were dealing with something beyond our understanding, a malevolent force bound to the remnants of the old farmhouse, hungry for our fear and desperation. I grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her towards the door, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature continued to drop, our breaths visible in the frigid air as the ghost drew closer. In a desperate attempt to communicate, my father began to chant the protective symbols he had seen earlier, his voice steady despite the fear gripping us. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, their light pushing back the darkness that surrounded us. The ghostly figure recoiled, his form flickering as the protective energy took hold. "Help us, set us free," his voice echoed, a plea that resonated deep within my soul, summoning every ounce of courage. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the wall where the symbols were etched. A surge of energy coursed through me, the protective symbols enveloping the room in a radiant light. The ghostly figure let out a final, anguished scream before dissolving into the light, the oppressive energy lifting as if a heavy burden had been removed. The room returned to its former state, the symbols fading into the background as the temperature began to normalize. The door swung open effortlessly, inviting us to leave the cursed place behind. We fled the farmhouse, the howling wind and lingering echoes of the night's horrors fading behind us. As we drove back to our farm, the snow began to settle, the blizzard's fury subsiding as quickly as it had arrived. In the days that followed, the story of our encounter spread through the village, the legend of the haunted farmhouse growing with each retelling. We never returned to the site, the memory of that night etched into our minds forever. The footprints and the eerie symbols remained a mystery, a testament to the thin veil between our world and the supernatural forces that occasionally breach it. Years later, the Great Blizzard of 1938 is still remembered not just for its ferocity, but also for the stories of lost souls and unexplained phenomena that emerged in its wake. Our farm survived the storm, but the experience left an indelible mark on our family, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lie hidden beneath even the most serene landscapes. And sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, when the wind howls just right and the snow blankets the earth in silent stillness, I catch a faint echo of those anguished screams, a haunting reminder that some secrets are buried not just in snow but in the very fabric of our existence, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to seek the truth. Story number 6. Whispers of the Ural Storm. I've always been fascinated by the unexplained, the mysteries that lie hidden in the most remote corners of our world. So when I stumbled upon the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, my curiosity was instantly piqued. The tale of 9 Russian hikers who met a gruesome and inexplicable end in the Ural Mountains during a ferocious blizzard in 1959 seemed like the perfect subject for my next documentary. Armed with determination and a thirst for the truth, I decided to embark on a journey to retrace their final steps, hoping to uncover what really happened that fateful night. The Ural Mountains, stretching like a silent barrier between Europe and Asia, were a landscape both beautiful and unforgiving. By the time I arrived in the nearest town, the sun had already begun its descent, casting long shadows over the snow-covered peaks. The locals were tight-lipped, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and sorrow when I inquired about the incident. It was clear that the Dyatlov Pass was a place of lingering trauma, a scar on the collective memory of the region. Undeterred, I rented a sturdy all-terrain vehicle and began the trek towards the pass. The journey was arduous, the roads barely visible beneath layers of snow and ice. As I navigated the winding paths, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the whispers of the past, or so it seemed. The isolation of the mountains was palpable, each mile bringing me closer to the heart of the mystery. Setting up camp near the site where the hikers were found, I felt a chill that wasn't entirely due to the freezing temperatures. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, a sense of being watched that made my skin crawl. I unpacked my gear, setting up cameras and audio equipment to document any anomalies. The night was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the relentless wind and the occasional distant crack of ice shifting. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted, and the wind intensified, whipping the snow into a frenzy. I decided to take a walk to get some fresh air, hoping the solitude would clear my mind. As I trudged through the snow, the whispers began, soft, almost indistinct voices that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath my feet. I paused, straining to hear, but the sounds were too faint to make out any words. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence, echoing through the mountains like a banshee's wail. My heart raced as I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was no one there, only the swirling snow and the oppressive silence that followed. Shaking off the fear, I continued my walk, trying to rationalize the sound as a result of the storm's fury. Back at camp, I reviewed the footage from earlier in the day, hoping to catch any signs of movement or unusual activity. The video showed nothing out of the ordinary until the timestamp reached midnight. where the screen went static for a moment before the scream pierced through the speakers. My blood ran cold as I realized that something, or someone, was trying to communicate with me. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I decided to spend the night in the area where the hiker's tent was found. The tent, now a crumbled heap beneath the snow, stood as a silent testament to the tragedy that unfolded years ago. As I settled into a makeshift shelter, the temperature dropped further, and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. Around 2 a.m., the whispers returned, louder and more urgent this time. "Leave, leave now," the voices seemed to chant, their desperation palpable. I tried to ignore them, focusing instead on capturing the sounds with my audio recorder. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with a sense of impending doom. Suddenly, the ground beneath me began to tremble, the snow swirling in unnatural patterns as if responding to an unseen force. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, making it difficult to breathe. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, fleeting forms that vanished when I turned to look. My flashlight flickered, the beam wavering as the storm outside reached a fever pitch. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a presence behind me, a cold, invisible hand pressing against my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The whispers turned into anguished cries, the voices of the lost echoing through the night. Panic set in as I realized that I was not alone, that the spirits of those who perished were still bound to this forsaken place. Desperate to escape, I grabbed my gear and began to run, the snow whipping against my face and the wind tearing at my clothes. The whispers followed me, a relentless chorus of sorrow and rage that seemed to claw at my sanity. Each step felt heavier than the last, the oppressive energy threatening to pull me back into the abyss. As I neared the edge of the pass, the storm began to subside, the whispers fading into a haunting silence. Exhausted and broken, I stumbled out of the mountains, the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds. The landscape was serene, the snow-covered peaks glistening in the morning sun. But the memory of that night lingered like a shadow. Back in town, I shared my experiences with the locals, who listened with a mixture of fear and understanding. The Dyatlov Pass was more than just a tragic event. It was a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, where the echoes of the past still haunted the present. My documentary would delve into these supernatural aspects, shedding light on the untold stories of the lost souls who still roamed the Ural Mountains. Years later, the documentary gained recognition for its raw portrayal of the Dyatlov Pass mystery and the eerie phenomena that surrounded it. But the true horror of that night remained with me, a constant reminder of the thin line between curiosity and obsession, and the dark forces that sometimes lie just beneath the surface, waiting to be awakened by those who dare to seek the truth. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the mountains and the snow begins to fall, I can almost hear the whispers of the lost, a haunting echo that reminds me that some mysteries are best left undisturbed, their secrets buried beneath the unforgiving embrace of the storm. Story number 7. Echoes of the Great Blizzard. I've always been fascinated by the power of nature and the stories that emerge from its most devastating displays. The Great Blizzard of 1888, one of the most severe storms in American history, left an indelible mark on the East Coast, burying hundreds of homes under relentless snow. But beyond the statistics and historical accounts lies a darker, more haunting narrative, one that has been whispered through generations, a tale of lost souls and mysterious phenomena that still echo in the coldest corners of the region. It was a chilly autumn evening when I first heard about the legend. As a freelance journalist with a penchant for uncovering forgotten stories, the mystery of the Great Blizzard intrigued me. The tales of survivors hearing agonizing screams from beneath the snow-covered houses piqued my curiosity. Who were these voices? What had happened to the families who vanished without a trace? And what were those strange marks that were reportedly found on the walls of the buried homes? Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I decided to visit the remnants of the blizzard's devastation. Armed with my camera, notebook, and a deep sense of purpose. I set out for Boston, the epicenter of the storm. The journey was long, the roads still bearing the scars of the winter months. But my determination kept me moving forward. Upon arriving, the city had transformed. What was once bustling with life was now a quiet, almost eerie landscape. The buildings stood silent, their facades covered in a thick layer of snow that seemed to mute the sounds of the world. The air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of pine and the lingering chill of the storm. I made my way to the outskirts of town, where the worst of the blizzard had hit, the snowdrifts towering like ghostly sentinels guarding the secrets of the past. I decided to start my investigation at the site of an old, abandoned neighborhood that had been completely buried during the blizzard. Maps from the time indicated that this area had been particularly hard hit, with entire blocks flattened under the weight of the snow. Today, it was a desolate expanse, the remnants of shattered windows and collapsed roofs barely visible beneath the white blanket. As I walked through the silent streets, the weight of history pressed down on me. The oppressive silence was broken only by the crunch of my boots on the snow and the occasional distant call of a crow. My flashlight beam danced across the ruins, capturing images of what once was a family's home, now nothing more than a ghostly silhouette against the snowy backdrop. I found myself drawn to a particularly large snowdrift near what used to be Elm Street. According to local lore, this was the site where a family of 4 had disappeared without a trace. As I approached, I felt a strange energy in the air, a sense of being watched that sent a chill down my spine. Ignoring the unease, I began to dig, my hands numb from the cold, uncovering the remnants of the past. Underneath the snow, the foundations of a house emerged, the wooden beams twisted and warped by the pressure. I carefully cleared away the snow, revealing the entrance that had long been sealed by the storm. The door, once a sturdy barrier against the elements, now hung crookedly on its hinges, a silent testament to the force that had brought it down. I stepped inside, my flashlight illuminating the remnants of a life abruptly halted. The interior was frozen in time, the furnishings covered in a thick layer of snow and ice. As I explored the space, the stories I had heard came flooding back, of screams that pierced the night, voices that called out in desperation, and the eerie silence that followed when rescue teams arrived. In the living room, I found the strange marks mentioned in the legends. Deep gouges and scratches marred the walls, intricate patterns that defied explanation. They seemed almost deliberate, as if someone or something had tried to communicate through the devastation. I took photographs, documenting the eerie symbols that spoke of anguish and desperation. As night began to fall, I set up my equipment, hoping to capture any paranormal activity that might occur. The temperature dropped sharply, the cold seeping into my bones despite my layered clothing. I sat in the living room, the silence pressing in around me, and began to review the footage from earlier explorations. That's when I heard it, a faint, agonizing scream that echoed through the empty halls. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the sound growing louder, more desperate. It was as if the very walls were crying out in pain, their voices a haunting reminder of the lives lost to the blizzard's fury. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound, navigating through the ruins with a mix of fear and determination. The screams led me to what had once been the master bedroom, the bed still bearing the imprint of restless sleep. As I approached, the temperature dropped even further, my breath visible in the frigid air. The room seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the walls resonating with the echoes of past suffering. In the corner of the room, I saw them, shadowy figures flickering at the edge of my vision, their forms barely visible beneath the layers of snow and ice. The screams grew louder, the voices overlapping in a cacophony of pain and sorrow. I felt a presence behind me, the oppressive energy pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. Turning around, I faced the source of the disturbance, a translucent apparition of a man, his face twisted in eternal anguish. He reached out towards me, his eyes hollow and empty, a silent plea for help that resonated deep within my soul. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening as the spirits of the lost family confronted me, their sorrow palpable in the air. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm raging within the walls. The apparition didn't respond, but his presence was overwhelming, the weight of his suffering pressing down on me. I realized then that the spirits were trapped, their voices forever echoing through the ruins, seeking closure that could never be found. The strange marks on the walls were not just random scratches but a desperate attempt to communicate, to tell their story to anyone who would listen, determined to honor their memory. I spent the next few days documenting everything I could, piecing together the tragic story of the family who had perished in the storm. Their lives had been cut short in an instant, their screams swallowed by the blizzard, leaving behind only the echoes of their pain and the lingering spirits that haunted the ruins. As I prepared to leave, the storm outside began to subside, the snow ceasing its relentless assault on the landscape. I took one last look at the abandoned neighborhood, the weight of the history and the spirit's sorrow heavy on my heart. The great blizzard of 1888 had not only buried homes and lives, but had left behind a legacy of pain that still resonated through the snow-covered streets. Driving away, the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds, I felt a profound sense of connection to the lost souls of Elm Street. Their stories were now a part of mine, their voices echoing in my mind as I vowed to share their tale with the world. The Great Blizzard was not just a natural disaster but a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of sorrow. Years later, the story of the Great Blizzard's haunted echoes continues to captivate and terrify those who hear it. The abandoned neighborhoods remain silent, their secrets buried beneath the snow. But the legends persist, stories of lost families, mysterious marks, and the relentless screams that still echo through the coldest nights. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the snow blankets the earth in serene stillness, I can almost hear the faint echoes of their pain, a lingering reminder that some stories never truly fade, but live on in the whispers of the past.